Space Invaders, released in 2002 for the Game Boy Advance courtesy of Activision and Taurus Games, is a remake of the 1978 arcade classic of the same name. But more specifically, it is a conversion of the 1999 remake of Space Invaders that graced PC, PlayStation, and Nintendo 64 platforms. And so if you've played those versions, Space Invaders on GBA will be familiar fare, but if not, well, there's a classic mode that lets you play vintage Space Invaders stretched out on a GBA screen and with somewhat questionable performance. It plays the part well enough, but barely sounds it, and it seems like the game tends to chug quite a bit with a screen full of Vaders. That's not very promising. Fortunately, the rest of the game fares a bit better, and like I said, it's a remake of Space Invaders but follows the same basic principle. You have a descending fleet of invaders, and your goal is to wipe them out with your grounded turret before they kill you or before they land on the surface. The general progression of the game is that you're going through all the planets of the solar system, yes, even Pluto, and with each planet you're introduced to a new type of invader, and there's a variety of invaders for you to tackle. Some of them have different properties, different attacks, take a couple hits, that sort of thing. And also each enemy type, if you kill 4 of a kind in a row, you'll be given one shot of a special weapon of sorts, a variety of which includes a missile that cuts through enemies, a swarm of missiles, that sort of thing. On occasion you could shoot down a mothership, which will drop a shield power-up that will defend your ship for one hit, or increase your firing capabilities. Once again, one hit of any kind will kill you and reset you back to your basic level. Lose all your lives and it's game over. No continues, but you can save your progress from the pause menu. Up to 5 save slots, which is quite nice, and the game retains your lives and score, so best beef those up as much as possible. So Space Invaders is a rather lengthy game. You're going through all the planets, and each planet has about 10 waves or so that you have to blast through, as well as a bonus round that has you shooting down motherships for points and an extra life. And the final wave of each planet pits you against a big boss that you eventually have to defeat to proceed onto the next planet, which again will introduce a new type of foe or hazard for you to overcome. Control is simple enough. One button shoots your main guns, the other shoots your special weapon if you have one. Not much to it, it works well enough for the game. Space Invaders does offer a couple 2-player modes via Game Link, a competitive or a co-op mode, as well as the ability to toggle between normal and expert difficulties. The game itself isn't anything too fancy, but it's an updated version of the classic Space Invaders formula. Spruce up the visuals a bit, add a bit of color and variety in the enemy selection, toss in a couple power-ups, that sort of thing. Not quite as loud, outlandish, or bombastic as some of the more recent Invader updates, but that's okay. This one gets the job done quite nicely, and is as low-key as you can get while being a serviceable update without diving into the depths of psychedelic mind fart like said recent remakes. In terms of the graphical aspect, this being a port of a former console title, Space Invaders actually looks quite decent. The opening graphics for the title are kind of neat, but the in-game stuff looks alright for a conversion. You have some nicely rendered planetary backdrops that vary from planet to planet, although not by much. There's a wide variety of enemy types that look fairly good considering they're not all that huge to begin with. Bosses are decent looking, it looks fine for what it is, and it is not nothing amazing, but it gets the job done, I suppose. Space Invaders doesn't boast the best audio quality, however, not just in terms of the classic mode, which barely sounds the part, and I do stress barely. Now, being fair here, when I looked at the N64 version of Space Invaders many moons ago, I wasn't a huge fan of the audio output. You had a rather generic techno-sounding cut of tunes that didn't really resonate, just background noise for all the generic sound effects of flying missiles and explosions and stuff. And the GBA version is essentially more of a chiptune-ish version of that soundtrack, which is a bit more upbeat, but that's about it. And the sound effects do pack a bit of a punch, but are still kinda sorta there. Nothing really to say about that, honestly. Overall, Space Invaders on the Game Boy Advance is a respectable port of a respectable remake of an arcade classic. It sticks true to the classic gameplay while adding its own bells and whistles to the mix in order to create a more contemporary take on the game, for the time at least. Now, time has come and gone, and Space Invaders has gone through numerous remakes that make the game more palatable to modern sensibilities, often to drastic degrees, but this is not one of them. It's a fairly low-key update to Space Invaders, and it's done well enough. It's not something I would go out of my way to play because it's really nothing special, but if you could find a copy for cheap, either this GBA port or the PS1, N64, or PC versions from which this was derived, it's fun for a lark, I suppose.